While walking past a park, I saw a couple kissing on a bench. And then I realized it was my fiancé, with a man she said she blocked months ago. When I called her and watched her check her phone mid-kiss. The strange part is that the evening was supposed to be ordinary. I had wrapped up a meeting on the other side of town and decided to take the long way home because the air felt decent for once. That route cut right through the neighborhood park, the one with the old benches arranged in a half circle around a fountain that never worked. People walked their dogs there or sat around on their phones. Nothing dramatic ever happened, which is why the sight of a couple kissing on one of those benches barely registered. I walked right past them without thinking. At first it was just two silhouettes against the glow of a street lamp, tangled together and enjoying themselves in a place that had no business hosting romance. I kept walking until something tugged at me. The woman's jacket. Light gray, cropped, with a small stitched line along one sleeve where the tailor had fixed a loose thread. I knew it because I had bought it as a gift for Raya 3 months earlier, and she had worn it a few times around the house, saying it fit her perfectly. I slowed down and gave myself a second to breathe. I turned my head just enough to glance back. The street lamp hit her face when she leaned away for a moment, brushing her hair behind her ear in the exact way she usually did when she talked. And that was the moment everything stopped feeling normal. I wasn't looking at some stranger. I was looking at my fiancée, Raya. There was no way to pretend it wasn't her. I recognized everything. Her profile, her shoulder-length dark hair, even the shape of her ring on her finger. I stood still as if my mind needed permission to accept it. She pulled the man closer again. Their movements were casual, almost practiced. I didn't storm in or shout. I didn't move at all for a few seconds. I simply watched long enough to understand I wasn't hallucinating. Then my eyes shifted to the man. He finally looked up during a pause, and that hit even harder. He was familiar. I didn't know him personally, but I had seen his photo once on Raya's phone when she insisted he was someone who used to flirt with her online. She said she blocked him because he couldn't take a hint, and because she didn't want any misunderstandings between us. His name was Elon. I remembered it because she had rolled her eyes dramatically when explaining the whole situation, saying men like that were exhausting. Yet here he was, sitting with her, kissing her, and she seemed perfectly comfortable. For a moment I considered confronting them right there. It would have been easy. 30 steps back to the bench, and everything would be exposed. Instead, I pulled my phone out and called her. There was a kind of sick curiosity in me, something slow and deliberate, that needed to see what she would do. Maybe I wanted to give her one last chance to prove something was off, though I already knew nothing was off except my understanding of reality. She pulled away slightly when her phone buzzed. She checked the screen. I saw her expression clearly. She recognized my name instantly. Instead of answering, she let the call ring for a couple of seconds, silenced it, slid the phone back into her pocket, and leaned in toward Elon again. That was all I needed. It was undeniable now. No excuses. No confusion. She wasn't in danger. She wasn't mistaken. She was choosing this moment, and this man over answering the fiancé who believed she was home preparing for the weekend plans she had insisted we should not postpone. I stepped off the path so I wouldn't be visible if she looked around. I watched them talk. She rested her hand on his knee. He held her waist. They laughed together about something. Then she stood up, and he followed. They didn't walk toward the main entrance of the park. They walked in the direction of my apartment building. At first my mind refused to connect the dots. Maybe they were heading somewhere else. Maybe they were going to a nearby street. But they stayed on the main path and turned at the exact corner that led straight to my place. I followed from far enough not to draw attention. I didn't like the feeling, the slow burn in my stomach, but I needed the truth. The closer we got to the building, the more obvious it became. This was not their first time. They moved like people who had walked the route many times. There was no hesitation, no confusion. They reached the entrance. Raya typed in the code without even glancing around. He stepped inside behind her. She held the door long enough for him to catch up. That was the moment I stopped walking. I stood at the opposite corner and watched the door close. A small part of me hoped they were going to a neighbor's unit or meeting someone else. But a larger part knew that she had just walked into the place she shared with me, with another man beside her. My head felt strangely clear. No fire, no panic, just a sharp awareness that everything had shifted. Whatever our relationship had been up to this point was no longer intact. The betraying part wasn't the kiss itself. It was knowing she had been comfortable bringing someone into the building where our life existed. I didn't go inside right away. I didn't want a dramatic confrontation fueled by raw emotion. I needed to think with the clarity I had left. I walked around the block slowly. The city streetlights flickered on one side while the park lights glowed behind me. The air felt colder than before. When I finally approached the building again, the windows of my apartment were lit. The curtains were unevenly pulled, something Raya only did when she was in a rush. That small detail confirmed she had enough confidence to treat the space like her own even while bringing another man to it. That was when the first twist settled fully. This wasn't a sudden impulse or a one-time lapse. This wasn't something that had happened by accident or under special circumstances. She had been doing this long enough to know the route, the timing, the building code, and the confidence to walk Elon right through the front door of the place where our life was supposed to be anchored. I didn't enter. Not yet. I watched the lights move between the living room and the hallway. I needed to be steady enough to face whatever came next without losing control of the situation. After a few minutes, I walked away again, circling the block until I could think clearly. I didn't call her. I didn't message. I didn't do anything that could warn her I had seen everything. The advantage was in staying silent, because silence meant she didn't know what I knew. I sat in my car with the engine off and stared at the dashboard. It was the strangest calm I had felt in a long time. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that forms when the truth becomes undeniable. You don't negotiate with it. You accept it. You let it shape your next move. I stayed there until I felt prepared to enter the apartment again. Whether Elon would still be there or not didn't matter. Whatever happened inside that night would be the beginning of something irreversible. I stepped out of the car and headed toward the building, ready to see what was waiting. When I walked into the apartment, the living room lights were still on, but the air felt strangely quiet. It told me Elon had already left or was about to. The hallway carried a faint trace of cologne that wasn't mine, which gave me the confirmation I expected. Raya stepped out of the kitchen the moment she heard the door close, acting as if nothing unusual had happened. She leaned on the counter with a casual face, like she was waiting to talk about dinner plans or weekend errands. Her expression shifted slightly when she noticed how calm I looked. She probably expected me to return in a normal mood, not a composed state that held everything in place like a wire pulled tight. She greeted me with a tone that tried too hard to sound natural. I asked her what she had done that evening. Her answer came fast. She claimed she stayed home because she had been tired after work and wanted to rest. She described the imaginary quiet evening as if she had rehearsed it. She mentioned watching a series, cleaning the kitchen, and trying to do some laundry, but feeling too tired to finish. I let her talk until she reached the end of her invented routine. Then I asked her whether she had gone to the park. She blinked once and shook her head lightly, insisting she hadn't left the apartment. Her voice jumped half a register higher. That small change was enough to tell me she already sensed trouble. I didn't accuse her outright. I told her calmly that I had walked past the park on my way back and saw her jacket on someone. She insisted there must be many similar jackets in the city. I described the tiny stitched line on the sleeve. The air shifted again. Raya tried to laugh it off, but her mouth trembled. Finally, she asked why I was making assumptions. The question felt like a last attempt to keep the walls standing. I told her I saw her face clearly. She opened her mouth again, ready to deny it, but her voice collapsed under the weight of the truth she couldn't hide anymore. She changed tactics entirely. She said she had gone on a walk to clear her mind. She said she had run into Elon accidentally. She said he had cornered her emotionally, and she didn't want to cause a scene. She explained it as if she had been placed in a situation where she had little choice. I listened, and when she ran out of excuses, I asked why they walked back to the building together. She froze. The silence dragged long enough for her expression to shift from defensive to nervous. Then she admitted it hadn't been the first time they talked recently. She said they had been trying to untangle old feelings because their past had lingering tensions. She described it like some emotional knot that she felt obligated to resolve. That was her second lie wrapped around a smaller truth. She tried to frame the situation as if she had lost control for a moment, but everything from their comfort level to her body language in the park contradicted that story. The more she talked, the more inconsistent her words became. She shifted explanations every few minutes because none of them worked. At one point, she said she didn't want to worry me. Then she claimed she didn't want to be rude to Elon. Then she insisted nothing inappropriate happened except for a misunderstood moment. Her version of the story bent in every direction except the honest one. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't shout. I told her exactly what I observed. The jacket, the way she leaned toward him, the way she ignored my call, the path they took, the code she entered without hesitation. The truth washed over her like cold water. She realized she couldn't redirect anything anymore. Her expression collapsed into a mixture of guilt and panic. She tried one more tactic. She approached me as if closing the physical distance could soften the situation. She reached for my arm, but I stepped back. Her face tightened. That was when she abandoned every soft approach and started insisting we could recover from this, if I was willing to forgive her. She moved in circles, describing how her mind had been tangled with doubts about our upcoming marriage, how she didn't know how to talk about it, how Elon represented some unresolved piece of her past. Every word she chose was meant to create emotional fog. I asked her directly why she brought him into my building. Her eyes flicked to the floor. She didn't answer. That silence revealed more than any explanation she could have invented. The conversation went nowhere useful after that. She switched between panic and pleading. She said she didn't want to lose everything we had. She claimed she had made a mistake. She insisted she just wanted clarity and closure, as if those things required the kind of intimacy I witnessed. At some point she realized I wasn't yelling or insulting her, which seemed to unsettle her more than anger would have. My calmness created a boundary she couldn't manipulate. When the argument tired itself out, she walked into the bedroom and shut the door, probably hoping the night would somehow reset by morning. I stayed in the living room long enough to gather my thoughts. The lights hummed above me. I could still sense Elon's presence in the air. The couch cushion was slightly displaced, which meant he had probably sat there before leaving. Some glass on the table was out of place. Small signs that told the full story even if she didn't. After an hour of sitting in silence, I stepped outside to breathe. The hallway felt cooler than the apartment. I leaned against the wall for a moment, trying to sort through everything. That was when the door down the hallway opened and my neighbor, Tamara, stepped out with a bag of trash. She glanced at me, nodded, and walked toward the chute. Then she paused and asked if the guy who had been visiting lately was a friend of mine. I asked her what guy she meant. She described Elon without hesitation. She mentioned she had seen him entering the building a few times over the past month. Sometimes alone, sometimes with Raya. My chest tightened. Tamara wasn't dramatic or nosy. She was simply making polite conversation, which meant her observation was clean, unbiased, and entirely real. She added that she didn't want to assume anything, but it looked like he was around earlier that day too. She wished me a good night and walked back inside her unit. I stood alone in the hallway with the kind of clarity no confrontation could have given me. Raya hadn't stumbled into anything. She had been meeting him regularly. She had used the place where we planned our future to host him. I went back into the apartment without making noise. Raya was still in the bedroom. I walked past the door quietly, sat on the edge of the couch again, and let the truth settle. There was nothing left to figure out. The reality had been consistent for far longer than I knew. All the nights when she said she was visiting her sister or staying late because of work made more sense now. All the sudden mood shifts. All the insistence that she needed breathing room during certain weeks. I packed some essentials into a duffel bag. I didn't slam drawers or make a show of it. I packed enough clothes for a few days, my laptop, and the charger. I left the engagement ring box exactly where it was. I didn't touch anything symbolic. This wasn't the moment for symbolic gestures. It was the moment for clarity. I walked out quietly, closed the door behind me, and took the stairs down instead of the elevator. The building felt different now. He had walked through these halls more than once while I had gone about my days thinking everything was fine. In the parking lot, I placed the bag in the trunk of my car, sat in the driver's seat, and stared at my hands on the wheel. I didn't feel rage. I felt something far more stable. It was the sensation that the next steps had to be deliberate. Sleeping in the apartment that night made no sense. Talking more would be pointless. Accepting her shifting stories would only blur the truth that was already clear. I drove away with no destination in mind other than somewhere quiet enough to think. The distance gave me something I hadn't had for weeks without noticing it. The ability to breathe without waiting for another lie to surface. What happened next would define everything that followed. And nothing in my mind suggested forgiveness or patience would play any role in what was coming. The situation had reached a point where each step forward would feel like pulling apart the life I thought I understood, so I planned to approach it with full intention. I spent the night in my car behind the old grocery store near the river, not because I had nowhere else to go, but because I needed a place untouched by the chaos inside the apartment. The steady hum of the streetlights and the occasional passing truck created a strange sense of stability that I hadn't felt in days. I woke up early, not fully rested but steady enough to think clearly. The morning air felt different, sharper, like the city had already decided what direction the day would take, while I was still catching up. I checked my phone before pulling out of the parking lot. There were 6 missed calls from Raya and 3 messages asking where I was. None of them held weight anymore. They were noise. My plan wasn't to disappear or hide. My plan was to understand the full scale of what had been happening behind my back. Confrontation without understanding would give her room to twist narratives, and I wasn't going to let that happen. I wanted the truth, not to repair anything, but to close the door on the past without uncertainty. I drove toward the area where her sister, Faye, lived. She had warned me once in the past that Raya tended to bury things when she felt cornered. At the time I thought it was just sibling frustration. Now it seemed like the only reliable thread to pull. Faye opened the door wearing a robe and a tired expression. She looked at me for a moment, as if measuring whether this was a conversation she was ready for. Once she realized the stiffness in my shoulders, she stepped aside and let me in without a word. We sat at her small kitchen table, the one covered with some plant pots and an unfinished puzzle. The sunlight hit the room in a clean, cold line. I told her what happened in the park. I explained how Raya had acted when I confronted her. I kept the tone steady because I didn't need sympathy. I needed clarity. Faye didn't interrupt. She kept nodding slowly, the kind of nod someone gives when the puzzle they suspected for years suddenly clicks into a full-picture image. When I finished, she exhaled deeply, as if she had been holding air for months. She said Raya had been talking about taking a break from the engagement for weeks, but hadn't told me anything. She said their conversations had become strange because Raya kept circling back to doubts about settling too soon, and that she had been comparing our relationship to some unresolved past with Elon, although she claimed it wasn't serious. Then Faye dropped the third twist. She said Raya had been planning to pause the engagement for a while, not to break it entirely, but to clear her head, so she could decide between me and Elon without hurting anyone. I sat still. The words didn't shock me in a dramatic way. They settled into place like the last piece of a puzzle that had been sitting on the table for too long. The betrayal itself wasn't the biggest part. The planning was the part that defined everything. I asked Faye how long this had been going on. She said Raya had reconnected with Elon months ago under the excuse of resolving old issues, but it escalated far faster than she admitted. Faye believed she had stopped seeing him. Now she realized she had just been told what Raya thought was convenient. Faye didn't defend her. She didn't sugarcoat anything. She admitted she warned her sister this would end badly, but Raya insisted she deserved the freedom to explore unfinished chapters. Faye asked whether I planned to tell their parents. I told her I didn't want to create theatrics or put anyone in the middle. I just wanted the truth in the open. She nodded again, relieved in a way, because she had been carrying this tension for too long. Before leaving her place, she told me one last detail. She said Raya believed I would wait for her if she decided to take time away. She believed I was stable enough, loyal enough, and patient enough to endure her indecision. That assumption alone felt heavier than anything else. When I stepped back into the sunlight, I felt strangely grounded. The truth had become complete. There were no missing parts now. I didn't return to the apartment. Instead, I headed to the cafe where Raya's family had planned a dinner that evening to finalize some wedding details. I knew she would go because she valued appearances around them, and I also knew her parents had no idea anything had shifted. The day stretched slowly until the evening. I waited outside the cafe and watched people step in and out. The window reflections showed groups laughing over meals, waiters carrying trays, and the kind of calm that contrasts sharply with someone's personal disaster. When the time came, I stepped inside. Her parents greeted me warmly, unaware of what had happened. I sat at the table with them and waited. Raya arrived a few minutes later, startled to see me there early. Her expression flickered with confusion, then anxiety. I didn't delay. Once she sat down, I addressed the table directly. I explained that I had discovered Raya with Elon in the park. I explained she had brought him into our apartment. I explained the parts that were not open to interpretation. Every sentence was delivered the way facts are delivered in a meeting, clean, steady, undeniable. Raya tried to interrupt. She insisted it wasn't what it looked like. She tried to shape the events into misunderstandings. Her parents' expressions shifted gradually from puzzlement to concern to something darker. Then Faye, who had agreed to join the dinner, arrived and took her seat. She didn't hesitate. She backed up everything I said. She told her parents what Raya had been planning. She told them about the pause. She told them about Elon's return into her life. The table froze in place. Her mother looked away, unable to face the mess. Her father kept his eyes on Raya with a level of disappointment that seemed to cut through every layer of noise in the room. Then the final blow arrived. The restaurant door opened again, and Elon stepped inside. Not because he wanted to join us. Raya had messaged him earlier, asking him to meet nearby in case she needed him. He looked confused when he saw the table full of people staring at him. Her father stood up. Raya tried to speak, but couldn't form a coherent sentence. Her mother excused herself and walked out of the restaurant with stiff shoulders. The silence that followed was the kind of silence that marks a turning point in someone's life. Raya's face crumbled. She reached for my hand as if she believed I would shield her from the consequences, but I moved my hand back. The weight of the situation settled, not loudly, but undeniably. The dinner ended abruptly. Her father asked her to leave with him. Elon stood frozen by the entrance, not sure whether to go forward or backward. The staff looked uncomfortable. Faye squeezed my shoulder gently as she followed the rest of her family out. I remained seated for a moment, letting the room breathe around me. The confrontation was complete. There was nothing left hidden. The full picture of her choices had unfolded right in front of everyone she cared about. When I walked outside, the night air felt lighter than the morning air had. The truth had moved from suspicion to certainty to exposure in a single day, and the consequences had started forming immediately. What was left now wasn't anger. It was the quiet clarity that comes when every piece lands exactly where it belongs. The next step would not be dramatic. It would be precise, and it would be final. The morning after the dinner felt strangely quiet. Not peaceful, but emptied out, like the floor had been swept clean of every illusion I had carried into the last months. I woke up in the small motel I had checked into after leaving the restaurant. The bed was stiff, the air smelled faintly of detergent, and the curtains barely covered the window, but nothing about it felt uncomfortable. It was the first space in days where the truth didn't follow me around like a shadow attached to every object. I checked my phone. Raya had written a long message late at night, trying to frame the dinner as a misunderstanding that had spiraled out of control. She insisted she had been confused, overwhelmed, caught between loyalty and unresolved feelings. She tried to redirect the conversation toward how she feared disappointing her parents. She tried to paint herself as someone who made mistakes because she panicked, not because she chose to. I read it once and placed the phone face down. There was nothing left in those words except an attempt to rewrite what everyone had witnessed. I didn't respond. I packed my bag, checked out of the motel, and drove back to the apartment. I wasn't going to live there anymore, but I needed to collect the rest of my things. When I arrived, the hallway felt different, as if the building itself knew what had happened the night before. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The place was quiet. She wasn't home. A few minutes later, I heard the door open. Raya walked in with uneven breathing, carrying the tired look of someone who had spent the night trying to control a narrative that slipped out of her hands. She froze when she saw the half-packed suitcase and the folded clothes on the couch. She started talking immediately. She said she understood the situation looked terrible. She said she regretted letting things go too far. She said she needed time to explain everything. Every sentence sounded like she was negotiating with the air, hoping something would land. I told her I wasn't staying. I told her the engagement was over. I said it without raising my voice. I didn't need drama. I didn't need a final fight. I needed a clean line separating what used to exist from what now existed. Her reaction changed instantly. The calm pleading turned into desperation. She said I was rushing. She insisted we could still rebuild trust if we worked as a team. She tried to appeal to the history we shared. When that didn't work, her tone shifted again. She accused me of humiliating her at the restaurant. She said I had cornered her and made her look like a villain. She tried every emotional lever she knew, one after another, hoping I would take any bait. I stayed silent until she was out of breath. Then I asked her one question. How long had she been seeing Elon inside the building? She didn't answer. Her eyes moved to the floor, then to the hallway, then back to me. She couldn't even hold the point long enough to build another excuse. That silence was enough. I zipped my suitcase. I grabbed the last few items on the counter. I didn't dramatize the moment. I didn't slam the door. I simply walked out because everything had already been said in 100 different ways. But the day wasn't done. When I reached the parking lot, someone was leaning against a dark car with the posture of someone waiting for trouble. Elon. He straightened when he saw me. For a moment, I thought he was there to posture or defend himself, but his expression wasn't aggressive. He looked unsettled, almost embarrassed. He approached carefully, as if he wasn't sure whether I would swing at him. I didn't. I just waited. He said he needed to talk. I didn't respond, so he kept going. He said Raya had told him she lived alone. She said the engagement had been called off weeks earlier. She said she was trying to move forward but didn't know how to tell her family because she feared their reaction. He said he believed her because her certainty had been convincing. He said everything escalated because she kept describing me as someone in her past, not someone still in her life. I didn't correct him. I let him speak because every detail he offered only clarified the depth of her deception. He went on, explaining the visits, explaining the casual confidence she had in the building, explaining that he had no idea she was still preparing for a wedding during the same weeks she had been inviting him over. Then he said something that tightened everything into a sharp point. He said she told him she was planning to finalize things with me soon. As if I were a formality she needed to close before committing to him fully. The day before, when Faye talked about the planned pause, it had sounded selfish. Hearing Elon's version made it sound premeditated. I didn't yell at him. I didn't blame him. He had walked into a story he believed was legitimate. She had been the one controlling the script. He apologized before leaving. A long, quiet apology that came from someone who understood the situation only after the damage had already been done. Then he stepped into his car and drove off, leaving a short trail of cold air in his wake. I stood there for a moment, absorbing the last missing layer of truth. Everything made sense now. The lies weren't frantic attempts to cover panic. They were structured steps in a plan she hadn't expected to collapse in public. I drove straight to a rental office and applied for a new place. I didn't want to stay in a building that held echoes of her double life. The inspection went quickly. I signed the documents. By evening, I had the keys to a small apartment with bare walls and a quiet hallway. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt untouched. That night, I blocked her number. I blocked her social accounts. I didn't write a final message. I didn't explain myself. The decision didn't require theatrics. It required distance. The next days unfolded like a sequence of consequences she hadn't expected. Faye messaged me saying her parents refused to speak to Raya. They blamed her for the dinner meltdown. Her father demanded she move out and stay with a friend until she figured out her life. Later that week, I heard through Faye that Raya's job had postponed a promotion she had been preparing for because she missed an entire day after the disaster at the cafe. Her reputation at work had taken a hit. She tried emailing me twice through an old shared account we had used for event planning. I didn't open them. She tried sending a message to my new apartment address through Faye. That message stayed unread as well. What I didn't do was retaliate further. Her life was already unraveling without intervention. My part in the story was finished. After the truth came out, all I needed was the space to rebuild my own path. Months later, while unpacking a box of old cookware in my new kitchen, I found the engagement ring tucked into a pouch I had forgotten about. I held it for a moment, not with sadness, but with a clean understanding of everything that had led to this point. The past didn't sting anymore. It felt like something I had stepped out of rather than something that had been ripped from me. The real closure didn't come from leaving her, exposing her, or confronting her. It came from watching the truth arrange itself into a shape that left no room for regret. Her final attempt at contact came half a year later, through a long letter she mailed to my old workplace. A coworker handed it to me. I didn't open it. I placed it in the shredder without reading a single line. Some stories end with a dramatic scene. Others end quietly when you choose not to re-enter a place where you no longer belong. This one ended the moment I saw her in the park. Everything after that just confirmed I made the right choice.